right, folks. It's 2 o'clock and I really want to make sure that we are respecting your time. Just gonna remind everybody we're here with a good portion of the artists from the Paper Routes exhibition, Women to Watch 2020 in Ohio. And this is an opportunity to hear artists talk to each other about what's going on in their practices, what's inspiring them, questions that they might have for each other about each other's works. These are the kind of things that you might experience and hope for in a reception. And, you know, it's hard to gather right now, so we're doing the next best thing and trying to allow space for this kind of development and flowering of relationship that you would get naturally if you were in person. So big thank you to the Ohio Advisory Group that partners with the Ohio Arts Council to put this exhibition on every other year. It's really pretty phenomenal to get to take a deep dive, and from the swath, the amazing cloth of artists that are across the state, a very narrow few are selected to be represented in this exhibition. And so it's a real honor to have these folks chat with us today. So without further ado, I'm gonna push it to our artists, and folks, tell us how you're moving through art making these days.
Who's gonna speak up first? Me. How am I moving through it these days? I had a transitional year physically. I moved my studio into a new space. So, you know, it's a weird time to move to a new place and settle in with a new community, which, you know, has kind of, that part of it has barely happened. But it's been a really good year to get my space set up and start to establish new routines. So, so I'm just, you know, spending a lot of time alone, which I'm sure some of you can relate to, and just working through it in the studio.
I am a parent, so I have 2 children that are 2 and 4. So when COVID came and everything was canceled, like my daycare was canceled, so it's been really chaotic. Because sometimes my kids are in the studio with me, but sometimes I need time away from them. And then also virtual school. Here in Cincinnati, we had virtual school for like the first 6 weeks, but now my daughter is back in school half-time. So, but it's been like a really big transition, and it's been really crazy. So,
has that essentially kind of halted your standard practice?
Yeah, I would say like my regular practice, yes. It's made it more that like when I have to move a lot faster when I do have time. So, I mean, I guess that's kind of good, but it's also like today or yesterday I was trying to paint these like circles. And then when my daughter came home, my husband had taken them out for the day. And then when my daughter came home, like they just wanted to get into the paint because I had taken over the living room. And so she was like, this morning when she woke up, she was reorganizing my artwork. And then I was like, well, the next ones are going to be yellow, so we're not touching any more paint. And then she was like, okay. And then she went upstairs to my studio and grabbed the yellow paint. I feel like she's like doesn't like art as much as like telling me what to do. So I feel like she's going to be like a colorist. Yeah, she's going to be like a curator or something. She just likes managing my artwork right now. So, which is good sometimes, but sometimes I just need some privacy.
Well, I would love to say that I utilized all the time off, you know, this summer with a brand new studio that's in my backyard that I'm very thankful for because I have a partner who's an architect. But, you know, I really didn't. I was really engrossed in other things. I added about quadrupled my garden space in the back. We're getting ready for bees next year. And it was really good because, you know, I think I was personally affected by COVID. I lost my mother And I just was sort of right, you know, in the midst of finishing up the year teaching, and then all of that happening and having to go back and forth to DC. But really, honestly, I have to say that this has been such a good year, despite the fact that it's been little making. It's been making in so many other ways, and it's been just really, really, you know, fed me in a lot of ways. So I've been very happy with just being outside and being in the garden and doing that.
For me, I would say that COVID has had a huge effect just on my day-to-day life. I am a service worker full-time, so all of my art practice has to happen either before or after work. And I was working on Cosmic Cave over the course of 9 months, and when COVID hit, work became far more demanding physically, mentally, and emotionally. So Cosmic Cave was something that I was like, I would work on in my head during the day, and then I would go home and just do what I could. So if I had enough energy, I would work on making the forms. If I was feeling really tired, I would just work on smaller things like the flowers. Now that that is complete, I am trying to focus more on making space for joy in my life, especially because my physical day-to-day is so demanding. So I'm trying to follow my spirit, whether that's just drawing or latch hooking. I've taken up roller skating for like my first ever hobby. So it's made me try to use my time a little bit more decisively. So 2020 has been quite difficult, but it's also brought a lot of learning with it.
So in my day job, I teach at the college level. And so, you know, when we went online at the beginning of COVID, you know, there was like a scramble to redesign all the coursework. And then I also had an administrative role in relation to preparing for the fall for safe reopening. So that has taken up all my time, you know, to think about the like health and safety and behavior that one would need to engage in a group studio environment. So I think in some ways, you know, a lot of the things that, you know, we've all been thinking about is like how we care for one another and take care of one another in community. And so, you know, that plus the current like political situation, you know, those are the things that are top of mind. So in terms of like the impact on the studio, there was much less studio time because there was more time spent like researching and planning and things like that. But I think ultimately thinking about, you know, how people behave in collective will be something that that will come back to me in the studio pretty intensely.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a high school teacher, and I was able to spend a lot more time in my studio in March and April and May because I was teaching from home. And that was such a gift to finish work for this show and then just to make work that no one would see and experiment and make awful work and learn from it. And, you know, it was really, really lovely. In the summer, I feel like my studio practice is usually pretty seasonal, where in the summer, I really give myself some grace to I spend a lot of time outside every summer. And I use that time, I always say it's when I notice what I notice. And it's like, I'm just collecting everything, ideas, experiences, the sun, the warmth. And normally this is when things start to ramp up again. And in the winter, I just hunker down and start producing. So I feel like in many ways, it feels kind of normal, like going back into the studio now. I gave it a deep clean last week. And now I'm back teaching in the school. So I have a little bit more of a strict schedule. And I find that then I'm extra productive when it's a set time that I can work, that I get to work, then I really make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
How about Katie?
Yeah. I was just thinking earlier when we were talking about if we were some of us are in our studios right now, and some of us are at home, and I'm kind of in both. So with the year itself, pretty much just prior to COVID hitting, I had to give up my studio just for cost reasons. And that was really, sad to lose the kind of place to go to work. But I've found in the months since, a shift in what I make and how I make, because it's all here. Obviously I, look forward to the day I can do a studio space again that's outside of the space that I live in. But I can't really ignore the fact that it's feeding sort of how I make and what I make. So especially working this show and how it shifted, kind of pre and post COVID, and then thinking about future projects. It's a real challenge, but also an opportunity to think about how it can be in a space when my space right now is so small. And yeah, I think just sort of taking it day by day and thinking about what I can do with what I have over what I don't have.
Breanne, how about you?
Hi everyone. I think I can relate to like what all of you are saying in one way or another. With like the pandemic and like the transition to online teaching, and just, with the quarantine, I've just been all in, like just inside. And the pieces in the show are all things that I can make at home. So I have transitioned my studio to my house. And I've also been focusing on this project space that I started here in my house, and trying to sort of turn it inside out, where I'm making shows and events happen outside and then installing work outside. So just been trying to funnel some collaborative things into it, and then highlight students and just try to like create community as much as possible. But it's been really tricky, and I think I feel for the students too that are going through all of this with us.
Yeah. How about you, Adrienne?
So my access to my studio didn't really change because it's in my house. But one big change for me is that I work with so much found material. So normally a major part of my studio practice is going out and hunting for old books and prints and old paper to work with at, library book sales, antique book and paper fairs, thrift stores, and all of that was pretty much cut off since March. So that's forced me to really go through and look at like this catalog of material I already have to work with. And it's caused me to like revisit some older projects because I already have that material available. So in a way that's been good. It's, forced me to re-examine materials I'm working with and what I already have to work with. So another big change for me is that even though I live in a rural area, I have always been super connected to the arts community in Cleveland. And I would be there like multiple times a week for openings or lectures or what have you. And now I go to the city maybe like once a month. So I feel very cut off from that. And it's really made me think about what it is to be an artist in a rural area, and also, the access to the arts for other people who live in my area or even farther away from a city, and how cultural centers could become more accessible to people who live far away, and using technologies like we're using right now, maybe to reach broader audiences.
Great. So I'm curious, folks, you're all a part of a Women to Watch show. What does that mean to you? How has that affected you? What are your kind of thinkings around that?
I mean, one of the things that I think about a lot is like how wonderful it was to talk with Matt on the phone, and have a studio visit with some of the people that I wouldn't have. I mean, I don't know how he and I would have ever met under other circumstances. So that has been really significant to me. So many artists that I admire, that I know from here in Cleveland, some of them are here in this room, which is really amazing. And then in previous years, they've been part of Women to Watch. So it feels like that's also a real honor to be part of this community that is growing year by year, and to think about, just that's been really wonderful.
Yeah, I've with friends in Toledo co-founded a critique group for female artists and women artists living and working there, and it came about just like from a need for support for one another and a need for critique and feedback from other serious working artists. And it really became such an important part of my practice over the last few years. And I feel like this is such a great extension of that, being in an exhibition with all women, and geographically not too far from one another. I feel like it's another great way that, women are building community in this like crazy life of being an artist that's so unstructured in so many ways. And there was something else I was gonna say that Sarah made me think of and I forgot. So maybe
well, if you think of it, come back.
I think, similar to what other people have said, like I felt really honored and to be part of a community. I felt really touched by what Stephanie had written about, women and being connected to paper as a material, and how it's like this ordinary object and doesn't really seem that important, or we don't really think about it outside of like something to be drawn on, and how much I guess like in a history of like not acknowledging women's accomplishments, or using them as a platform to succeed without like talking about like women's work. I think I felt really touched by that.
Mm-hmm. That reminded me of what else I was going to say. I think I was really excited to be in this show this year, specifically, just historically leading up to the 100th anniversary of suffrage for women, and it being such a significant year politically and so forth. I mean, there was just so much that, like, I think as the opening of the show approached, it felt more and more momentous and important to be a part of this exhibition.
I think so for me, being from Dayton, being non-binary, being a young artist, and being included in the show is a really wonderful thing. I really admire the opportunity to be able to work on such a large scale. I've made installations before, but to be able to create something immersive really just feels so resonant, especially seeing now where we are and following the threads of thoughts that I had when I was beginning to conceptualize this last year about the unknown and shadows and the effect of, not dealing with collective shadows and what can happen when those things come up and when we begin to integrate them. And I've really enjoyed the opportunity to be able to connect with a lot of other wonderful artists from across the state. And I really admire the breadth of inclusivity that the curators put together, because I think that everybody brought something special to the table, and I think that all of our work all together is really strong.
I would tend to agree. It is really interesting to think about what you all have said. One, Emily, I echo your thoughts and the recognition of a humble material and how you folks are really the alchemist here, creating gold and amazing things out of a very mundane material. And also, to what Sydney said as well, I think that many of your pieces gained even stronger meaning through current times. Kind of the collapsing of importance of news in Sarah's work, it just like really, stacks up more, right? Like there are these in, Sydney as well, like thinking about being alone in a space, being alone with your feelings and how you work through that. In Katie's work, thinking about these kind of vignettes of people that we love and how do we see them and how do we interact with them when we can't touch them. And just like each of you have had, I've been able to spend a good chunk of time with your work. I mean, Breanne, your piece is at the end of the gallery, so someone comes through and it's just so poignant to end on, is there a tomorrow, right? Like there's your work is really has this tongue-in-cheek, but it really pulls you into it. I'm curious what questions you all have for each other since you've seen each other's work now. Or do you have any curiosities for each other? None? Zero?
I mean, one of the things that I was thinking about, particularly for the artists who sort of foreground collage as an aspect of their work or appropriated imagery, was like how much, like how they think about like the archive of images, in general, like what are the criteria they put around their selection process, and then how does their archive like work in the studio for them? Like how do you organize, sort, and prioritize in the studio?
Yeah, I had a similar question for Katie.
Yeah. Cool. My wheels were turning. I think because I was thinking about how, again, this project started before any of this COVID had happened, and I was kind of surprised at realizing how much touch was involved with it and hands are in it. And when it started to come together, there was no way it didn't have kind of a vibration of it in some ways. I think that could probably be said for everything, but thinking about the archive or archival process, a lot of the times I will collect images where I think I know exactly what I want to do with it. Sometimes I just like the image itself. Other times I know I'm going to, do something really specific with this, but I'm never going to alter it because it's like perfect the way it is. So I guess the irony when I go to take this work down, there will be some things that I can apply to other surfaces. So it'll probably go onto paper, ironically enough. But a lot of it will be ultimately destroyed. And that kind of has been a recurring thread in a lot of work I've made in the last few years, that it's either destroyed or it's so altered by just the material of the tape or how I've installed it that there's a one-time only kind of deal with it. But definitely thinking in forward-thinking projects, what else I could do to either maintain it a little longer, or maybe that is the point of it, is to just have it one time and it goes. But yeah, it would definitely, I think another thing I was with the hands itself while installing, I believe it was Natalie's work with the big hand. I was there the day you were like getting that laid out, and I was just really excited to have like a big hand in pairing with a bunch of little hands. It's just I love it when work can come together in a space and they just start to like echo and reverberate off each other, even if they have nothing to do with each other, maybe in meaning or, you know, form, but there's something there that kind of holds a mirror up to each other.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
But I like this question of the, I like this question of the archive. And I think for me, it's something that I've been thinking a lot about in my work, just in general, over the last couple of years. And the pieces in the show, the Is There Tomorrow and the Langston Hughes poem, I mean, those are, the sources for those are special collections archives, and they came from, excuse me, the Bad Times archive here, where I teach at the University of Arkansas. And Bad Times was the student newspaper published by BAD, which was a student group called Black Americans for Democracy. So I think for me to like pull those texts, and Is There Tomorrow, and think about those in the context of the gallery, and like being in Columbus, you know, it felt like I was using like things from the past that, you know, where people were advocating for visibility and representation on campus, like continuing to try to honor those histories and share that history here, especially that is often overlooked in like a state sort of government oriented space. Like that felt sort of like an intervention or like a silent protest. So yeah, just to kind of speak to like your comment about the archives, because I think we all use them in such different ways. Yeah, there's just a spectrum of access points, I think, and in making counter archives that are like sort of in protest to like the institutional space where things aren't necessarily accessible. Anyways.
How about the other folks that might have had an answer to that question? Maybe perhaps Adrienne?
So in terms of how I, like the parameters I set for sourcing materials, it's pretty open-ended. Basically, I'm just looking for things that I think would be in like a cabinet of curiosities, and that could be images from a book that's, you know, hundreds of years old or a contemporary book. I'm also looking for paper that's, you know, has signs of history. So if it's someone's handwriting or staining, foxing, that kind of thing, I think that's really beautiful to work with. And I have a pretty obsessive catalog, and it's something that I made further obsessive during lockdown because I had a lot of time on my hands. So I spent like weeks just really going through, I had like hundreds of thousands of little cutouts. And so I organized them in this like vast system of trays. And so I could be like a category like flowers, then it could be like white flowers, then it can be by size, or it could be by shape, and it gets more and more obsessive. And to me, that is almost like an artwork in of itself. It's really kind of beautiful to pull out a tray and just see how everything lays out. So that's what I'm pulling from. And in my process, it's kind of like creating a kaleidoscope or a puzzle where I'm constantly like pulling pieces and arranging them, putting things back, and it's pretty organic until I find a composition that I find visually pleasing.
I'm curious about the folks, we have a lot of installation work in this exhibition, and I was chatting with some folks yesterday about the relevance of installation for folks right now, and how it can only be experienced right in person, and then after that it's only documents of that experience. And so there's an impermanence, the ethereal nature of it, that I was excited about, that kind of conceptual link to what we are all experiencing. So I'm curious, folks that are more installation based in this exhibition. If you had any thoughts on that. I know Katie, you had mentioned it a bit, but curious on the other folks, what your thoughts are.
Well, I guess for me, I really like the lack of permanence for an installation, because I feel like it draws you to the moment like that you're in, because you're not going to be able to experience it all of the time. And I think there's something really wonderful that you can't necessarily just take a picture of it. You know, it does have to be experienced. Like, you can't take a picture from far away, but that doesn't really have the effect of like walking around or through a space. And so I think, especially now when we're stuck in our homes and everything is virtual, I think the experience of being out in the world seems more important. And I never realized how much I really took just my life for granted, you know?
For me, as much as the work that I have in the show is more object-based and not installation, I love the art making experience where it doesn't stop in the studio. The creation continues in the gallery. And I love all of the problems that arise and the challenges and the openness. I just think it's this added element. And I've been trying to challenge myself to make more objects that I think finish in the studio now, which is a very different experience. But I think much like I want the viewer to walk through it, like I love that process of figuring out how am I going to walk through it when I'm making it and building it in the space.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that about completing objects in the studio. That's been a really challenging pivot for me this year. I'm really used to, I mean, I'll make small collages and small paintings as part of my usual practice, but they're usually all in like research mode for a larger site-specific project. And yeah, to try and, you know, approach painting from a slightly more, I guess, traditional standpoint has been like a fun, certainly a fun challenge, but a challenge nonetheless. It's, I have to admit, like a little disheartening to have work that's physically up that nobody can see. That's been a real challenge of this show. I think I've had work in other virtual exhibitions, but it wasn't actually physically installed anywhere. It was just a few images emailed over to a virtual space. So, none of those things I really anticipated, you know, like so many things we've done this year, you just kind of roll with the punches and like however people are figuring out to do things, I'm in favor of it because we want the show to go on, of course, and to be able to have these experiences however we can make them happen. But then, yeah, to install the piece, and I know, like I saw it and Katie saw it and Kat saw it, and I don't know how many of you made it to the gallery while the show was up, but beyond the artists in the show, like there wasn't an opportunity for people to stand in front of the work and with a show about paper, to think about the tactility of all of our processes and what that means for the art object itself. I think you certainly miss a lot by looking at a PowerPoint of the show as opposed to putting your body and your eyes right on it and in front of it.
Yeah. I think it'll make the next time going into a space when we finally can, like, extra special. I know, I mean, no matter what, way you kind of go about documenting it, it's never truly the same, but I think space itself is going to become such a new frontier that virtual reality, I think, was supposed to be the next big thing, and it still could develop, I guess, but I think people are just hungry and thirsting for being able to be with each other again. And it definitely had me question, what does it mean to make work that no one's going to see? And I guess too, you can think about if you have a website or blog or anywhere that you put your work, it's kind of a similar virtual shelf it sits on, and you don't know when people, or if people look at it to that degree. But I think most artists, even the most like super duper shy introverted ones, get something, which I'm pretty opposite. I know I feed off of people seeing it, because that just, it gets out of the me with the work in the studio or in the space, and just thinking about it to what do people kind of take away from it. So I'll definitely look forward to that day again.
There's something about, we're all so used to looking and sort of consuming imagery through screens. And I think that's become more of the norm. And in fact, I think work that images well is privileged. A lot of work that is more ephemeral, is more temporal, and is more sensory is not privileged, because again, we are always looking at Instagram and things on the screen. So I think it's a shame, again, echoing, of course, this is the time, but with paper, and that was a question I had for all of you also about the temporality of it, the fact that it's not going to last, very long. I find that to me is really an important thing, like the materialness of things. And I think that when we're just experiencing things through screens, it's so limited in that. And again, just so little comes out of it. And you think about, I was listening to what Adrienne was saying about the foxing on our paper, and I'm imagining that some of your paper might be a little smelly if it's foxed, just because again, it's older and it's got these milk, but there's all this great history and memory and tactileness, like you all were saying, about paper and about that material. And that's something, again, it's sad that we are so used to just experiencing things through screens and not really art so much in real life, and especially not right now.
For me, I'm just glad that I was able to install, because there was a point making the Cosmic Cave when things started shutting down. I was like, oh my gosh, am I even going to be able to see this come together? Am I even going to be able to install this? What is going to happen? So a lot of the making was not only, in response to my life doing my regular person job, but also thinking, well, I'm making this piece about the unknown. How is the unknown going to receive it? So I was really glad that I was able to take this piece and install it over the course of 4 days, and to be able to see it exist in real life beyond just my head or my maquette. And I cried real tears when those blobs went up on the wall, because it was so beautiful. And yes, it doesn't carry the same way online as it does in person, but I think it was really important for me and for the people who are close to me to be able to at least see this thing and experience this thing in some capacity.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Sydney. Like if you work site specifically, the work can't be made until somebody gives you a wall or a room or the space to realize it in. So even just being given the space is allowing the work to exist, whether or not people can see it in person.
I think that there's something else really kind of amazing that ties together the work in the show. And this perhaps could be said for all artists, but the amount of problem solving that goes into it, and even in the conversation that you're having here, there's this great balance that's being struck within the negotiation of ideas that I'm really enjoying, and I'm curious how that is playing out for all of you, like in your thoughts and listening to the conversation, and how that's tying together. So quiet.
I mean, I think that's part of the nature of making art, right? That it is like setting up challenges that you don't know how to resolve easily. Or, I mean, at least that's part of the way that I think about making art, you know, that one, you know, maybe puts out sort of like a rhetorical problem to oneself, or, you know, finds something like inspirational or challenging, and then is trying to kind of grapple with it through nonverbal. No, I mean, even for text-based work, you're trying to figure out what it is, you know, as a shape, as a form, as a thing, and even, or in terms of like relationships. And so I think a lot of that challenge, it's just like, that's part of what we do. You know, and I think now, you know, part of what I'm thinking about is really like how to, like actually just to slow down a little bit and allow what is happening in the world to like seep in a way that allows me, like, you know, to not just make work in a kind of reactionary fashion, but to really be thoughtful about, you know, what it is that I'm making.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Any burning questions for how each other are making their work, or what pieces had anything?
Yes, Natalie, your color use is incredible. Like, I hear lightsaber sounds every time I look at it, and I just wanted to know what inspires it, and yeah, how did you come to what you're doing?
Thank you. That's really sweet of you to say. I'm very inspired, and I guess it kind of relates to what Sarah was saying too, as far as creating challenges for yourself or problems to solve. I've been using day glow colors in my work for about 9 years now, and I didn't like set out to use them and think I would be still using them today necessarily, but they are colors that just consistently present a challenge to me. That there's, you know, I think you can think about them as great under black light, and like certain associations with those colors, like in like signage and so forth, that is where we experience them in like our daily lives. But to transform color that intense and kind of work it into my understanding of color theory is like so fun for me. Like I said, I never anticipated that that would be what I do, or like, or how I'm thinking about making a painting. But I think, though, honestly, those colors, I think they express what's like what I have inside of me that I want to get out in some way. And I just want to make them like sophisticated, because I don't think that's the way that you think about like hot pink necessarily, but to find a way to combine it with a palette that elevates it is just super fun. So thank you for that question.
That's great. Natalie, you did do an artist talk where you talked a little bit about the origin of the line that you're using, and whether or not, I don't know, Sydney may not have had a chance to watch that, but from the World War II or one, the women who painted the boats.
Yeah, dazzle camouflage. So the patterning, I had been exploring in my work a lot of like geometric abstraction and use of perspective and color contrast. These are all things that I was really interested in my painting when I became familiar with dazzle camouflage, which was a form of camouflage that was used by the British and American navies in the First World War. And they painted merchant ships that were like regularly getting torpedoed with these like beautiful abstract designs that were, you know, designed to fool the observer of the ship to, you know, not be able to determine the ship's position and direction and speed on the water. So it had this really practical application. And it was just such a like wonderful discovery. It was something I hadn't known about before, you know, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, and somebody shared it with me. But it was some like awesome practical use of like formal painting tactics.
That's great.
Mm.
So folks, what's happening now? What's next for everybody? And also, like, how are you thinking about creating community and supporting the proliferation of art these days? So very nice. All of you waiting for each other. I love it.
Well, I have a project called Eastern Pole, and it's an outdoor exhibition space on a utility pole where I live. And it's an extension of my friend Jesse Malmed's Western Pole in Chicago. And it's open submission. Anyone can send me a JPEG or a PDF, and I'll print it out and put it on the pole. And it's a solo show, which counts. Everything counts. So yeah, just put that out there.
I love that. Gosh, I think I'm just like, just hiding out and making, you know, I haven't even gotten as far as thinking about like, how to deal with all of this, you know, like it's been baby steps, you know, the first few months were like just, you know, painting for therapy, and now it's just trying to like get back some kind of normalcy and I don't know, taking advantage of like I don't know, I guess the time that I would be out socializing or out networking, or like the things that I would normally be doing is just studio time now. I think it's just, for me, it's just making.
Yeah, I really. Oh,
Yes, go,
sorry.
Sarah.
So I have another part of my practice that is public art, and so that I have a collaborator on, and she and I are working on a piece that will be at the Cleveland Clinic later this year.
Congrats. That's exciting.
I was just really going to echo what Natalie was saying. I think I've been enjoying the time in my studio, and for a while I had this mentality, well, when we get back to normal, things will just pick up where we left off, and obviously there'll be a new normal, a new thing, you know. So I feel like I cannot even mentally wrap my head around next week, let alone next month. So I just have been working on small little things and keeping my head down.
Yeah, yeah.
I've been, well, I have always done this, but I have basically a field recorder. So I've been just walking around collecting sound and working with that. And I also recently purchased a drone. So besides maybe becoming some kind of like NSA security person, no, I'm not, but I'm going to be taking a lot of drone footage over the forests near my house, just because so much of the ash tree population has gone. So that's some of the things that I've been working on, a big project that's about blight and looking at using both drone photography as well as captured sound, found sound, things like that, and mixing those together for, again, more of a sensorial kind of experience, but that's in my horizon.
Yeah, sound is such an interesting way to like get around this issue with seeing or experiencing art, you know? Although space could have so much to do with what you're hearing. I know, I like that. Excited to see what you make.
I'm finishing up I have a commission with the Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And I've been thinking a lot about artwork when it's not in a traditional gallery space, but it's still being presented like that. So the art that I'm working on is going to go into the rooms of the patients. And I think, like, especially like in the gallery, people don't really spend necessarily a lot of time with the artwork, but really when you take it out of a gallery space and put it in a hospital room where they're stuck, you know, and that like a lot of my artwork was like playfully cut paper and like having conversations with the hospital about like what they would want. I think, I don't know, it's just really made me think differently about like the need for artwork in just like daily life. So.
Absolutely. Love that.
Well, if anyone's in Cincinnati in June, I have a show at the Westin, and on June 27th, my collaborator Shannon Finnegan and I are hosting an event slash rigorous like academic conference about sandwiches, and it's called the Sandwich Summit. It's the 8th annual summit, and it's free and open to the public, and yeah, we'll announce more info in the coming months. So it should be really fun. The theme is Beyond 2020, because we were supposed to have it this past summer. So we're like really doing it beyond 2020 and 2021.
I'm doing a lot of, I think, different things to distract myself from the time being. I work a couple different jobs, and I really appreciated, Sydney, you speaking to your job, that it can be so tiring that when you come home and you want to work, sometimes I don't work at all and just shower and go to bed. So trying to think about how I can keep wheels turning that lead to something else with this time being feeling very stuck. And how I can make it be productive. So I'm also applying to a couple of practice-led PhD programs in Europe. So I guess that's my like escapism coming out. But I'd been eyeing a couple of these since grad school. And then I think as far as exhibition, I just finished up an exhibition at Roy G. Biv. And while I was there, I immediately became obsessed with, they have 2 bathrooms that they dedicate space to, and they call it the Roylet, like toilet with Roy in front of it. And I thought this was like the funniest idea ever, to just have work be in the bathroom, and that's all for sale. So I'm going to be doing that in December, and I'm very excited. Just giving me an opportunity to kind of make with the intention to sell, and just make small things and have fun with it, and see what happens in the next several weeks. We've only got like 2.5-ish months left, so race to the finish.
Strange to think about, right?
Mm-hmm.
The impact of the year.
Yeah.
Folks, we're coming up on 5 minutes until 3, and I want to make sure that I respect time. So if there are things that you all wanted to, that you were thinking about wanting to convey or talk to each other about, please, it's a great time to do so. I don't want to hold anybody back from that.
I just would want to say that I thought the just the layout for the exhibition was just really, really well done. I really enjoyed seeing so many people's work. I was just sort of echoing everyone's sentiments about being included in this, but again, just being able to see the work together, but also the way in which it was sort of directed and flowed, and like, you know, ending with Breanne's piece, but also just like the way that the whole thing, I think, just sort of, again, seamlessly went from one piece to another. And there was so much, I guess, tangential connections also with the work. It was great to see.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to be able to lay that out. So Amy and I do a lot of work before shows and take a look at the great material that, I mean, when you have curators give you fantastic work and you can start to see stories emerge from it, it's a lot of fun to weave that without overwhelming the original content of the work, right? Like, so thanks for that. I think that it does the work a really great service when there's an even greater opportunity to expand conversation about work, right? So like, how is this relating to this? Because it is true, when folks go into a gallery or a museum, there's, you know, a little bit of time that they're going to spend with artwork. But if you can amplify that in some way through a relationship that forces folks to talk about that, it's really nice. So yeah, appreciate that.
How many here were able to see the show? So a good bunch. Good.
A good solid handful of folks were able to come.
Yeah, Kat, were there people in the building who stopped in? Like, could anybody like actually come in, or was it just you guys?
So we had camera crews and a couple of staff and artists that did artist talks, and then of course security, and the super lucky folks that are on maintenance got to see it because they go into everywhere, right? It's really, yeah, it's hard to think about exhibition without being able to see it in person, but it's also making me kind of turn my concept of exhibition on its ear and see how we can solve for that and really support and amplify artists' voices in different ways. And so this is one of those ways. All of your thoughts and how you present ideas, it's not just in your art, it's in your conversation. And so it's really important for folks to be able to hear from you in that way too. So I want to thank you all for being open to this conversation. I hope it was worthwhile for you all. Your work is inspiring and has been a buoy for me through you know, a stretch of time that's been very strange, right? So I'm excited to see how you all develop and move through your creative processes, and please make sure that you stay in touch and share what you're up to. And it is just about 3 o'clock, so I think I'll close it up. And again, thank you all for joining. Those of you that